So our objective today is just to give you some tips and tricks and some advice on this milestone in your lives. Again, it should be, I think many things should be relevant for anybody who might be a first year or going into an internship, or anybody that's in a full-time role at this time. So with that, I want to introduce our panelists and give them a minute. In just a moment, we'll have them introduce themselves. But we have Colleen Casey, who's with Kraft Heinz, and Kwaku from, I don't know if I say it right, Frimpong, right? Frimpong. I don't think I've said your last name too often, Kwaku, because there's only one you. And Kwaku is your—
That was right. That was right.
All right, love it. And Kwaku is coming up to us from PepsiCo. So we are really excited to have them come back and take the opportunity to give back to Booth. So with that, I'll have Kwaku, why don't you start us off and introduce yourself, and then I'll continue on with a couple of slides before we get started.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kwaku Frimpong, Booth class of 2021. So approaching that 1-year mark from graduation in like a month, which is crazy. As Katie had mentioned, currently at PepsiCo, working as an associate brand manager on our Healthy Halo product. So our newest product, Gatorade Fit, as well as G0. Before Booth, I interned with PepsiCo in between my first and second year. And before Booth, I worked in out-of-home advertising sales, as well as in bond research in finance. So originally from New York, currently residing in Chicago, and happy to be here today.
Thanks, Kwaku. I've lost Colleen on my list, but Colleen, I know you're out there. There you are.
Hi, yeah, sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen Casey. Graduated with Kwaku last year in 2021. I work at Kraft Heinz. I also intern there. I work as brand manager on our adult portable snacking brands. So on kind of on the Lunchables team, but on the adult side. So P3 and Oscar Mayer Natural Plates. Happy to chat more about them. I interned on the Lunchables brand the summer of 2020. Prior to Booth, I worked at Dow Chemical in marketing, but very B2B. This was my first kind of consumer marketing role. I am from the Philadelphia area, and I was in Philly prior to moving to Chicago, where I am now.
Nice. Where it is a gorgeous day. So thank you to all of you who are here, giving up a little bit of that time, who, if you are giving up some outside time, we're very happy to have you, especially given what's out there. I'm going to go through a couple of more slides here. For many of you, you probably already know about the Kilt Center. Our mission, our ultimate purpose is to elevate, enhance the school's reputation for marketing. We do that in a few different ways. We facilitate research, academic research around the globe. We foster community and bring programs and activities to our students as well as alumni. And we also support innovations in the curriculum for anybody who's taken marketing lab classes. Definitely join us and follow us on LinkedIn, especially if you're graduating. It's a good way to kind of stay in touch on news and about your peers and so forth, and what's happening in the marketing community at Booth. So I think for many of you, it sounds like many of you are already planning to go into CPG. We just kind of preach here at Booth that marketing is really a lot more than just advertising, that it's analytical. It's really about the consumer growth and profitability, and oftentimes a path to the C-suite. We'll skip this slide. I think we are good to go on that one. And we've done our panelists. So with that, I've gone a little bit out of order. Sorry, team. I'm going to go ahead and get us started on our list of questions. So we have some questions here for our panelists, but I also, please feel free to start bringing in your questions through the chat as well. And we will be also happy to call on you if you want to raise your hand, come on camera, come off mute, and interact as well. So for both Kwaku and Colleen, you both interned at the same company where you took a full-time job. So Colleen, could you talk a little bit about maybe an advantage, or if there are any disadvantages you see to doing it that way?
So, I mean, ultimately, it was, I think, an advantage. There was a level of kind of comfortability and just, kind of having already relationships built. I went back to the same team, which was really cool. And so working with a lot of the same people, but I also went back with a different brand, different consumer, kind of like learning a completely different kind of skill set. And so I thought it was a kind of a cool way to get kind of transitioned into the world back to working full time and the CPG world. I do think that there is a certain disadvantage to going back, only in that I think that you can kind of sometimes get nervous you're not completely brand new. So I think you can get a little bit more nervous to ask questions. I should know this. I was here for last summer, and, a lot of times it can be really easy to either forget or not exactly remember exactly, who to go to for what. So I think there is some advantages of starting fresh. But, I think ultimately I was really happy to return to where I interned.
Thanks. Kwaku, do you have anything to add to that?
Colleen hit the nail on the head. One thing I'll add is the fact that even if you're not going back to where you interned over the summer, I think a lot of the same foundational things apply in terms of you have to get to know your consumer. You have to know like just the nuances of the brand that you're working on. I didn't go back to the same brand that I interned on versus where I went full time. And it was that learning curve was still there. It was one of those things that the target consumer for Propel was different than the target consumer for Gatorade Fit and for G Zero. So if I had interned it elsewhere, I still would have had to go through the same exercises, and I was interning at the same company. So I'd say a lot of those same mechanics are still going to apply regardless of your internship location.
Good. That's helpful as a starting point. I think why don't we kind of take you back, rewind about 12 months to when, or maybe you had a little bit of time off. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But when you started, what were some of the key things that you did in the first couple of weeks? Maybe things that really worked well for getting you ramped up, maybe some things that you wish you had done differently, if hindsight 2020. So talk about those first few weeks, months, etc. Kwaku, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I know for me, 12 months ago, exactly, I was getting ready for a Euro trip and that time in between work and graduation. So I was definitely in a different mental space. But one of the things that I did closer to the start of the full-time role was I started to just reconnect with some of my colleagues that I had the opportunity to meet the summer before. So, and it was more so just on an informal basis, just trying to get to know them, learn a little bit about some of the stuff that they're working on. I also was anticipating what team I was going to be on. For transparency, I found out my brand a little later than some of my classmates. I found out, I want to say it was the week or two before I joined full time. So it was more so a lot of conversation, just trying to like figure out, okay, where could I potentially land? What are the different teams that I would be interested in? So it was really just getting to know my classmates. But I took advantage of the summer before work started. I wanted to make sure I had some time off because I knew once I started working, like I'm never going to have that much free time. So I enjoyed it. I had zero regrets with that. And just got to know some of my colleagues in between time as the full-time role quickly approached.
Awesome. What was your experience like, Colleen?
So I would say my experience as, starting the role was pretty much very similar to Kwaku in that I tried to reconnect with people that I had worked with prior and just understand who I was going to be working on and just setting up meet and greets with them, right as I started the role, because I think it's also really good to kind of connect with cross-functionals and understand their metrics, how you can kind of best kind of assist them to meet their goals so that, you're kind of aligning. And I think it's easier to kind of kind of manage relationships that way. I think I like, when I first, initially started, I tried to get my hands on how, like, all PowerPoints that I could to really try to like understand the consumer, understand, all of the kind of, basics of marketing that you're all very familiar with. But I think also an area that I really tried to dive into is who's actually buying our product, not necessarily who we think or wish was buying our product. So I thought that was kind of a different shift that, and, just try to kind of, I think ultimately, I have a really good one. Once you learn what brand you're going to be on, go try the product. Like, go to the grocery store. If you're working on a tangible product, go to the grocery store, kind of try to like understand the consumer journey yourself. And really, I mean, obviously, if like it's something that you don't eat or don't use, if you're working for consumer products, obviously, within reason. But I think it's really important to like actually understand as a consumer, like how this product's being used, and so that you can kind of speak for experience.
So going off script a little bit, since you all had some questions for preparation purposes, but did you both have did you have a project right out of the gate, or was it sort of a slow ramp up where, Colleen, to your point, you had a little bit of time to do some background research, and start to get familiar with the brand and so forth? Or did you have a lot of tasks or charges right off the bat? Colleen, you start us off.
Sure. I would say that was one of the things I think that was most kind of surprising to me, that it was immediate. So some people, it depended on what brand people, so I came in with a cohort of 18 people at Kraft, across different functions, not just brand management, but a lot of us were brand management. I would say like 10 of us were brand management. So some people kind of had more of a project, almost like an internship type project to work on in the beginning. And then some people were immediately placed on a brand. I was immediately placed on a brand. So I had a ramp up period where I learned, but it was like very quick. So like, for example, we had, our monthly demand review meetings. I started in July. Right after that meeting, I presented at the August one without ever having like sat in on that meeting. So like, it was very quick. Obviously I have some advice for if any of you all go through that. But ultimately, like, I was kind of surprised that the ownership I was kind of given, with a lot of support as well, but the ownership that I was given kind of right off the bat.
Good. Okay. Let's not forget to go back to the advice on that front. Kwaku, what about you? What was your sort of initial responsibility level?
Yeah. So when I came in, we started in August, and that was an interesting time for the business because we were going through the rotations where people were transitioning to new roles internally and whatnot. So I was I had a ramp up period. So I had the opportunity to I knew the brand I was going to be on, but it was a matter of like when letting the dust settle and figure out who else was going to be on my team, who my manager was going to be, so that I can develop that rapport. So I used that time to just kind of get up to speed. My manager's manager had provided me a ton of documents to review. So PowerPoints, a bunch of onboarding docs just to like get me up to speed with what was going on. But I'd say that period took a few weeks. And once that got going, it was a matter, I was joining a ton of meetings and just kind of overseeing projects that I was going to eventually take over. And then all of a sudden it was like, hey, you're leading the meeting next week. So it was one of those things that it went from 0 to 100 real quick. So there was a ramp up period, but things changed. So it was like, you really had to like study during those portions and kind of just like see how people would lead meetings or just some of the questions that would get asked. And then the keys were handed to you to drive the car. So
thinking back for a minute to what I had started with, which is that a lot of, that I've heard that's going into brand management, for example, is a good kind of brings you a good work-life balance, if there is such a thing, do you feel like you were working more or less compared to when you were a student? Like, do you feel like you had more or less responsibility? That you had to put in hours that you put in? Kwaku, what about you?
Yeah, I'd say compared to when I was a student, like at Booth. Oh, I think the way I describe it is that your work is more so in confined time periods versus like the business school schedule where you may not have class one day and then like you maybe have team meetings, or like you're a little bit more chill one day and then the next day you like overdo it with class. I feel like we're grinding from 9 to 5 or like 10 to 6 or whenever your like work schedule is, and it's definitely hard work. And I'd also say for me personally, and I think for most people on this call, like we're all ambitious people, and when you're starting off somewhere new, getting up to speed is not the easiest thing to do. You know, it's like you're getting up to speed on acronyms that are used during meetings. You're getting up to speed on just terminology that's used internally versus externally, or like what you learn in the business school environment. And that takes time, you know, like that takes additional like hours outside. Like when you're in a meeting, they'll slow down, but like they'll still use acronyms that you may need to like write that down on the side and like do some due diligence to figure out what it stands for. So I'd say especially in the beginning, I definitely put in some time like after work to just kind of like, okay, like what were some of the acronyms I heard, or like what were some of the terms that I may not be as familiar with, just so that the next time that meeting came around, I had an idea on what they were saying or what they were saying during the meeting. Because when you start, it's like these meetings go quick and people saying, it seems like you're learning another language. So you're getting up to speed on culture, but you're also like trying to learn what people are referring to or saying, or like all of those things. So I'd say it also just depends on you, and there's not an expectation to do that, but I feel as if for all of us, we want to achieve greatness. So it was one of those things that for me, I felt as if, all right, after work, like I'll write these things down for an hour and then maybe like look them up after, or like ping someone that may know. So yeah, I'd say long-winded answer, but yeah, essentially like definitely working harder, and your time is just structured differently in the full-time world.
Yeah. Colleen, was that the same for you? Was it nicer to get a paycheck or a report card? Which would you prefer?
Oh my gosh, I would say definitely pros and cons to both. But it was honestly, it was a nice adjustment to kind of get back to the working world. But like, I completely agree with Kwaku that it was definitely challenging, and kind of had to put in some extra time, especially, you know, as I came up to speed. I would say that there were certain things that just took me longer, like that now I can kind of like run a consumption report really quickly, and like I know IRI super well. I also like had used Nielsen during my internship and then switched to IRI. So that was a learning curve. So, you know, there was things that just took me longer that now I feel like I can do very, very quickly. And even just prepping for meetings takes me a lot less time. But I think putting in the hours, yeah, to make sure that, you know, I think also like making sure I knew what the metrics I was reporting on really meant. I think it's like really easy to be like, you know, your share increased by X amount of points, but like why? And, you know, like to really kind of understand what was behind that data. And, you know, that just takes time.
Katie, you're
Sorry,
on
I
mute.
thought I had clicked. Yeah. I didn't click closely enough to the microphone. Tell me about some of the skills, I guess, that you maybe, whether you got them through a workshop or from class specifically. What are some of the things that you leaned on, some knowledge and or skills that you leaned on in the initial ramp up, you know, whether that was the first year or weeks or months? Colleen, why don't you start us off? Kind of keep going back and forth.
Sure. So, I mean, I would say that generally speaking, I mean, a lot of the skills, like the kind of hard skills, like IRI, you know, making sure that you're kind of modeling. We use a lot of models, demand models, things like that. So kind of coming up to speed on that, you know, kind of almost like refreshing myself on Excel, I feel like was an adjustment because I had obviously used Excel quite a lot in my role previously, but and with the exception of a few classes, you're not living and breathing in Excel the same way. So that was kind of an adjustment. But I would say also one of the things that I thought was super relevant is just kind of making sure I learned how to kind of simplify my message in a storytelling PowerPoint way. So I think that is super critical. And I think, I had some experience kind of with that at Booth as well as trainings at Craft. And I think that's really, really huge. And also really being able to cater your message to your audience. So what you're presenting to leadership may be way different than what you're presenting to your team, and really being able to kind of have that shift, I think was super, super critical.
And before we go to Kwaku, you've brought up IRI a couple of times and that you had used Nielsen in your internship. Can you just talk about, I guess what might be on people's minds is how much do you need to know about either one of those data sets in advance, and how you kind of got up to speed on either one, just briefly?
So I would say in advance, you don't have to know at all. You can learn on the job. There's a lot of trainings. There's a lot of support. I think most companies have dedicated support that you can email, and they'll pretty much get back to you within, hours, probably even less than that. And they have office hours every week. I mean, I really, really lean on the support that we have there. But I think what was super helpful and critical and what Booth prepared me for was taking classes like data-driven marketing, while you're not necessarily, using R to code or running, statistics that way, you kind of understand how IRI or Nielsen is working in the background and how to use those metrics, because I think that's another big learning curve of just to understand what these metrics mean and how I can use them to make business related decisions.
That's good. That's helpful. Kwaku, talk a little bit about those kind of key skills and what sort of things were helpful for you getting started.
Yeah. Again, Colleen nailed a lot of it. One thing that I'll say, honestly, I leaned on just being inquisitive, to be honest. It's one of those things you don't want to go into your new company and act as if you're an expert or that you know everything. And it could be intimidating at points where it's you're in a meeting and you may have been there only a few weeks and it's all right, you're leading something, or they gave you the keys to figure something out. I'd say I leaned into just asking questions a ton, especially the first few weeks. Honestly, not just the first few weeks. I still ask questions because you'd rather understand what people are talking about and make sure you're getting things right rather than assuming, hey, I went to Booth, I'm smart, I'll figure it out, because that can really lead to some big mistakes, when you're leading meetings, little things such as a recap of what happened, where you're sending, if you're leading a meeting and people miss the meeting and they'll ask you for recap notes, you want to make sure that you're understanding what the key points that were discussed in the meeting so that you can share that with your cross-functional team so that they can continue to move the project forward. And if you're not asking questions during the meeting on something that maybe supply chain reference that you have no idea what they're talking about, just to clarify, you may share the wrong information or you may miss something that's really important. So I'd say I lean on just being inquisitive, which I think we all are on this call. And that's definitely helped. When you're leading, don't act like a subject matter expert, especially when you're new. So.
Yeah, I think that I would guess that's a hard kind of a challenge to a mental shift. You came out of an MBA program. You're supposed to lead with confidence, right? And say, okay, I just got this training. This should give me a leg up in my career and so forth. But I imagine there's also a certain amount of humility involved in being kind of more or less at the bottom of maybe bottom-ish of the totem pole, right?
Yeah, for sure. And also to understand that you're going to be surrounded with people that have been in their roles for years, right? Like they're people on supply chain that have been there for several years. You know, they're people on product R&D that have been there for several years as well. So they understand it. Like they may understand it so well that they may speak quick and you may not get everything, right? But like because they understand things so well, they've seen many brand managers, product managers come in and figure it out. So they understand that there is that ramp up period. So I'd say lean into that as much as possible, just so that you have the opportunity to get up to speed as much as you can.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, we're 30 minutes in. I want to give everybody a chance to start sending some questions our way. This event, just like all of our events, this is for you, about you in the audience. We want to make sure you walk away with some of your quick curiosities. And you can both put it in chat, either put it in chat or come off, raise your hand and I'll call on you to come off mute. But just again, want to make sure that you get something, get out of this what you came to find out. I also want to acknowledge that this was a co-sponsored event with Career Services. So thank you, Erin, for being here. Erin Rossi from Career Services is here and can also answer some questions that if our panelists need to defer to her. So we have plenty of expertise on today's call. So please start bringing those questions in. We'll go back for a minute and I'm going to ask you again, a little off script. And Morgan, I'll come to you in just a minute. Were there any classes that you may have like pulled your notes out from on a regular basis, or anything that you can say, like, I took this class and I was able to pretty much immediately add it or apply that to what you were doing? Colleen, go ahead.
Sure. I would say, honestly, from like the immediate, when I was ramping up, I would say a lot of the like more soft skill leadership classes, like managing in orgs, I feel like I was constantly kind of referring back to those, to just kind of understanding. I feel like always examining like your biases as you're working with people, and just to also like learn kind of how to pause and rethink and, kind of unlearn how you were doing things before. I think that those types of classes were so helpful in coming up to speed. And I feel like that is really kind of what I kind of go back with. A lot of the behavioral science classes, I think I tend to really kind of I think apply them in my everyday work life, more so than some of the, more, hard, I don't want to say hard skill classes, but, the more technical type classes. And that stuff changes. I feel like the behavioral science stuff, is kind of something that you can use for the rest of your career, honestly.
Yeah, that's good. Kwaku, what stood out for you?
Yeah, honestly, Colleen, spot on again. Like, I feel like for me, interpersonal dynamics is the one where I've leaned the heaviest on. Just as like a project manager and a project leader, like in like Katie, you started it this way, saying that marketing is more than this advertising, right? Like going into brand, it's way more than that. Like a ton of what we do is project management. You're leading projects from point A to point B until they launch in the real world, and you're leading teams, and you, especially when you're new and you're meeting new people, you don't know how they perceive you. You don't know how you come off to them. And sometimes I felt like that class was great in terms of just getting feedback, and being vulnerable and trying to, and showing that humility to learn some of the things that you can improve on, and as a project leader, as you get up to speed. So I lean on that class heavily, and just a ton of the soft skill classes, like Colleen mentioned, managing in orgs. Obviously, the marketing classes were super helpful because you're just familiar with terms such as velocity and distribution and stuff like that, right? But the soft skill classes, you kind of use those on a day-to-day basis as you lead projects from point A to point B.
Okay. Morgan, do you want to come off mute and ask your question? And Annabelle will come to you.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming to visit us. It's great to see you both. I was curious if you've had sort of any chances to set up mentorship relationships and how you've navigated that at Kraft Heinz and PepsiCo respectively.
Which one of you wants to start? Kwaku, go for
I
it.
can kick it off. Yeah, for sure. I think that with Pepsi, people are super approachable. It's super, and especially in this hybrid world, it's super easy to just throw 30 minutes on someone's calendar, whether it's to like learn something or to just kind of like pick their brain on how to navigate stuff. We're approaching the portion with Pepsi where we're navigating what our next rotations will be. And I've thrown 30 minutes on the calendar with a ton of the booth alums, that I've gotten to know prior to booth and like throughout my time there, to just kind of ask them questions and just how to navigate rotations, how to think about just the next steps in my career and whatnot. So those opportunities are definitely readily available. I'd say the low hanging fruit are people that went to booth, but also too, like find people within your team that you like gravitate towards a year. Even if there's someone that they graduate class of 2021 or 2020, then they're like a age range peer. They still may have a year or two of experience on you, and that institutional knowledge is super valuable. So lean on your colleagues, lean on your superiors. But the low hanging fruit is definitely like the booth alums.
Nice. Colleen, anything you would add to that?
I would just add that, yeah, I totally agree with the booth alums. Getting involved, especially in recruitment, was super helpful with just kind of networking around the booth alums. I'm sure maybe you have even, I've spoken to maybe some of you, during the recruitment process. So that was really helpful. I also think that anytime someone offers you, kind of a one-on-one or anything along those lines, I think it's really, really a good opportunity to literally take them up on it and throw time on their calendar. Even just like, I feel like some of our general managers, offer that. And I've taken them up on it and tried to I feel like they're a lot more likely to kind of really want to talk about your career development rather than just what's day-to-day going on in the business. I also think that what I found was super, super helpful was having those kind of mentorship relationships with my own MBA cohort that was coming into Kraft. So a lot of us are really kind of, lean on each other for a lot of questions, and we're close, and we, have kind of a group Teams chat that we kind of throw questions in, still to this day, even a year after. I feel like that, it was a really great opportunity to kind of understand what everyone is working on. And, they might have built certain competencies that you're working to build. So I think it's really helpful to even kind of look and I think Kwaku kind of touched on that, but even look, not necessarily mentors that are super, more high level than you, but even just in your own peers.
Awesome. Thanks. So I'm going to move to Annabelle, who's asking about what are some skills that you didn't have that you wish you had? And so maybe what are some things you wish you had known coming out of booth? And then how did you learn those skills or pick up those skills if you didn't have them? So Colleen, why don't you kind of continue on?
Sure. So, I would say the asking questions and being curious, I think I had, but I think that I didn't realize how much that people are expecting you not to know everything. And I think that one of the feedback that one of my bosses gave in the very beginning was ask more questions. I know you don't know all this stuff. So I remember kind of being oh, that's interesting. I was just kind of assuming that I had to figure it out myself. And, sometimes asking a question or working 2 hours on something to try to figure it out yourself is just not very efficient. I would also say that one of just my pieces of general advice is, and I don't know if this might be a hot take, but it's I don't think you should fake it till you make it. I think that's bad advice. I think that you should kind of have confidence that you will learn, and kind of lead with that confidence, but also this comes back to the humility that you're not an expert yet, and kind of just ask questions and try to learn, and try to also be open to feedback, to understand, to know what you don't know. And so I think that's another big piece. Sometimes there can be blind spots that you have that you don't realize. And I think just kind of being open to that feedback is super helpful. So those are the kind of things that I wish I learned, versus like, oh, I wish I learned some, I wish I knew some kind of technical skill. More just like what my strengths and weaknesses are, kind of just being really introspective and really just kind of just trying to work on my development as a leader.
Kwaku, can you speak specifically to any, that was good advice. Thanks, Colleen. Anything like, do you use R, Python, SQL, negotiation tactics, anything really specific like that you wish that either you had and you used, or you wish you had?
We don't, like in my role, in terms of just like use the IRI stuff. Absolutely. I think like, because I took those classes, like I'm familiar with the terminology. Like it wasn't my first time like touching IRI or just like some of the stuff that's in there. But in terms of just like the specific skills of like how to pull stuff and just derive data like from R or like Python, we don't use that. We just go straight on into IRI and able to like do the pulls that we're looking for specifically. I think there's value to having like that exposure to it for sure. Absolutely. Mine is a little more like personal, where it's like, I think the requirements, like the one that I passed on was supply chain. And I kind of wish that, was that one of them, supply chain, right? I think that was requirements. Yeah. That's the one that I passed on. I did the other 6, and that was the 7th. I said, I'm gonna pass. But I wish that I'd maybe just taken one class in it, just to like have, not to be an expert, but just to have some sort of familiarity with maybe just some of the things that they're thinking about on their side. I probably still would have had just as many questions, but like just some of the terminology I might have had exposure to earlier. But yeah, like you learn a lot on the job, to be honest. Like even just with IRI, like Colleen and I, we took data-driven marketing. I think we were in the same group, maybe, like, I don't even remember, but like you're still going to go through it again when you're at your company. Like they're going to show you how to do it, and it's going to still take you some time to like, okay, someone asks you to do a pull, you want to make sure you're pulling the right stuff, right? So it still takes you time to do it. So yeah.
I would think another thing that I can just say from general job experience is that even if you learned it at some point during your career, during your MBA, for example, it's the repetitive practice of doing something where that's going to become more of an expertise for you. So you may have to refresh on something, and until you're really kind of flexing those muscles more frequently, they may not become as strong until you do. Emily, you had a question. Do you want to come off mute? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So I was wondering if you could talk about the associate brand manager career trajectories. And how do you know if you're on track in your career? Was also curious if you could talk about if up or out culture is a thing at Kraft Heinz or Pepsi.
Up or out? Okay.
Yeah.
Colleen, do you want to start off on that? Actually,
sure. I'm a year in, so I guess I can't really speak to like the whole trajectory from what I've learned and what from speaking to people and kind of understanding how they're working through the organization. We actually just also had a reorganization. So our org, we used to kind of have brand communications within our marketing organization, and now it's still in marketing, but it's kind of separate. So like now there's kind of a trajectory of like you can kind of climb up the ladder in comms versus like platform marketing, which is what I'm doing, more like brand marketing, day-to-day categories, innovation, those types of work. So I think that there's kind of different tracks now. Ultimately, I think though, like, the associate brand manager kind of leads into brand manager, which leads into kind of a marketing director role typically. And then it's kind of, there's different areas of like, you can go into kind of marketing strategy, or you can kind of become a general manager. So kind of like lead a platform that way. That is ultimately like what I would like to do. And, my ideal career, I like the general management side. I like kind of managing a P&L and having that ownership. And that's ultimately like what I'd like to do. And that, that's kind of, I think also the other side of that is, the CMO type of trajectory. So I think there's a lot. I mean, and also some people, pivot into sales, pivot into even operations. I mean, there's a lot of kind of cross-functional jumping that I was actually kind of surprised in. And I don't know if that's just a Kraft Heinz things or if that's across CPG, but that's kind of that's been my experience. And I also don't necessarily think that the like up and out culture, I mean, I think that like that might have been an old type of culture potentially at Kraft Heinz. I'm not really sure, but it feels like people are, willing to stay in jobs longer or take kind of even I would say lateral moves to get different experiences. And so like, that's been my experience so far. But I am kind of learning as I go.
Kwaku, what would you add to that, if anything?
Yeah. Lateral moves are definitely something that's pretty common. With Pepsi, you can go one of two ways. You can be a generalist or a specialist. If you want to be a and for Gatorade, at least, I think it's one of those companies those brands where it's so big. There are people that I came in with my class that are working on Gatorade, but they're doing completely different things than me, where like I'm owning a P&L, but like I have people that are having the opportunities to work with external agencies and lead campaigns and shoots and work with talent, which is a completely different experience, but it's a necessary skill set depending on what you want to do as a marketer. So for me, I'm going more of the generalist route. So I love the traditional brand strategy experience that I'm getting now, but at a certain point, I would like to have distinct experiences. I like to lead a campaign, have a commercial out there in the market, or maybe work on our app, you know what I mean, or our website, just digital marketing work a little bit in that space. So there's so many opportunities for you to go different routes, but there are also people on the team that wanted to be specialists. They want to work in sports marketing. They want to work in league partnerships. They want to work with the athletes directly. And like, that's what they want to do. Right. So it's just a matter of figuring out what your preference is and navigating internally with your company, wherever you end up going. What are the opportunities? How are the ways that you can get to where you want to go? Because sometimes it might be a lateral move. If you're waiting for a promotion into a team, it may not happen because people may not want to leave. So maybe like if you have to do a lateral move to get there, get your foot in the door, and then explore your upward trajectory, that may make sense. So for every company, that's going to be different. For every brand, it's also going to be different. So you just have to kind of know the how your brand operates, so that you can make that decision for yourself.
Awesome. We're coming up on the hour. If there are other questions out there, please feel free to put those in the chat or raise your hand. Is it Andrea or Andrea?
Yes. Hi. Thanks, guys, for being here. So since I'm in medical sector of my company, I'm not as familiar with marketing strategy. I guess I'm curious, how do you balance your time between like understanding your own product and then thinking about the competitors' products? And were you trained on like the thought processes of that? And then how do you kind of differentiate yourself from the competitor and manage like thinking about that as part of strategy?
Which one of you wants to take that? Go ahead, Kwaku, you're off.
Yeah, I could go. That's a really good question. I think that so I think for both of us, like we have the opportunity to like work with data, like we're in IRI, like we're monitoring our products and our brand success on a week-to-week basis. I think you have to be kind of intentional about like monitoring what your competitors are doing. I know for us, like we have time dedicated where like on Monday morning where it's like, all right, we're going straight into IRI and just kind of like pulling data, and you can derive what you want from the data. You can also use the time how you want, right? But like for me, like I pull for our new product, Gatorade Fit, there's a lot of eyes on it. leadership is monitoring. Leadership wants to know how we're doing compared to competition. So I create a whole report where it's not just like Gatorade Fit's performance. I'm comparing it against Body Armor. I'm comparing it against some of the other competitors in the market to see like how we're doing relative to them week over week. And granted, it's not necessarily always going to be an apples to apples comparison because your product is new or like, and they've been in the market a little bit longer, right? So it's like, you kind of have to like find ways to see, okay, like maybe this is where this product was this time last year when they were in the same spot. Like, so you can manipulate the data to see how your competitors are doing, or maybe there's a certain market where the competitor's doing well and like you guys are lagging behind. So like it kind of dictates, all right, like maybe from a sampling standpoint, like that can influence like how we want to dedicate those dollars to say, okay, like maybe this region of the country makes more sense for us to pick up some foot traffic so that, or like maybe we should work with our sales teams to like pick up ACV in a particular part of the country so that we can make up that difference compared to our competitors. So you get that over time. And the more comfortable you get with data, you're able to like inform, or it informs other parts of your day-to-day and other parts of your business. So where you're making strategic decisions, not just on, oh, like this would be great. Like maybe we should spend money here, but it's like, no, according to the data, we're doing great in these 3 regions, but like there's one region where we're lagging a little bit compared to whatever competitor, right? Let's do something there from a sampling standpoint, or like here are the key markets in that region that we should focus on. So that comes with time and that comes with reps. The more reps you get and the more comfortable you get in the data, you're able to like inform some of those other strategic decisions that you think about on a day-to-day basis.
So Colleen, before you go, I'm gonna real quickly, Sam, do you want to launch the poll real quickly and we'll continue on. Please don't think that that's an indicator that the event is over, because I want to hear Colleen's take on this, but we like to hear from our customers, you all, and hear a little bit about, and we'll give you a minute. Zoom has enhanced their product. We actually can accept qualitative answers now, which is super helpful for us. And so we'll give it just a minute or two. And there's also a link to a Qualtrics form if that's a little bit easier and you have any qualitative feedback that you want more time to spend, if you want more time to actually enter that. Colleen, I'm actually going to shift, unless there's anything that you think was super important to add to what Kwaku said in response to Andrea's question. I'm going to start you off on 2 things kind of as we start to wrap up. How do you know you're succeeding? And what is your parting advice for all of those who are a little bit behind you, ready to start this journey?
Great. Yeah. I mean, how do you know you're succeeding? I mean, setting goals for yourself, I think, is really important, and kind of also making sure. I think that it's really easy to kind of get into the trap of like, I'm competing with other people that started the same time as I am. And I don't look at it that way at all. And I think that that would be kind of ultimately a detriment to my own development and my own goals. I think ultimately, like, making sure that I'm growing and I am doing better. And also just really working closely with your manager and kind of getting feedback there, really trying to understand like how you can both collectively work on your own development and also on theirs. I mean, they will ask you for advice too, as they're trying to be a better manager. So I think like open and honest feedback is super, super critical. That's something that I also like want to really even like, and if you're, luckily my current manager is very open and honest with me, but if you're in a situation where they're not, just like asking more questions and trying to kind of get more information of, you know, really how can I improve? And I think that's also understanding like what your metrics are. So I think that there's also like because I feel like we talk a lot about like our own leadership development, but also like we are running a business. We do have like very clear metrics. So like really understanding what those are and what is most critical on leadership's minds. Shifting from, you know, the B2B world in the chemical space, we were focused on different financial metrics, to be honest. So I think that that's also really, you know, critical to really understand that and how you get, so like understand the what and then understand the so what. So like, you know, really understand the data, understand how you're performing, understand your competition, but like, what are you going to do about it? And I think that's the hardest piece of the strategy. But I think that's kind of also like, you know, coming prepared with explaining what's happening, but also what you're going to do about it. So I think that's ultimately like how I've been trying to kind of measure my success in the job.
Kwaku, what about you?
Yeah, I'd say really working with your manager. They are invested in your success. So your goals are aligned, right? Like they want to see the best for you. So you want to be open, honest, and vulnerable with them in terms of maybe places you think you're struggling, or ask, like to Colleen's point, just asking for feedback, and be intentional about knowing what your goals are, right? Like if you have certain goals that you want to accomplish in your rotation or just in your career, tell that to your manager, and like he or she or they can help you figure out like, okay, like what are the things that you should be doing, what are to help you get there. And all the information that you get is not necessarily going to be like data driven, right? Like some data might just be like pure feedback on how you led a meeting, or feedback on something you said that confused a customer or something like that, right? Like things like that, like be open to all the feedback, you know, whether it's like tangible stuff that you could like easily fix, like, oh, like I pulled the wrong thing in IRI, to maybe the way that you come off in a meeting, or just like things that like you could say differently or like phrase differently, right? Be open and don't take that feedback personally, right? But like also make sure you're aligning your goals, your development goals, with your manager, with people that are also invested in you, so that even if it's like a monthly check-in, right, where it's like, hey, like here's what we talked about last month, here's where I think I improved, what have you observed, right? And making sure that you're keeping yourself accountable, or just even like once a month, like writing down the things that you think you've accomplished well, or like things that you think you're doing well, and check in with someone to like, hey, like this is what I think I've done well, what would you think about it? Someone that you're working closely with. Have someone, an accountability partner, I'd say is super, super helpful.
Nice. Well, thank you both for being here. Thanks for so many insights. I hope that you felt like you got something out of, you know, reflecting on the past year for as a benefit to this audience, but also a little bit of a benefit to you. So we wish you luck in the next year to come, and best of luck to all of you who are moving into internships, full-time roles, pivoting to another job, whatever it may be. So thank you so much for being here.